Hello and welcome to our second revision video relating to USA, A Nation of Contrast, 1910 to 1929. Today we're going to be looking at key question 2, religion and race. And at this point I'm going to suggest that you pause the video and get these headings down, because this is what we are going to be studying today, either via a spider diagram or by a note. Totally up to you, however you revise and however you learn best. As last time as well, I will stress that don't only use this video to help you revise. This is going to give you a basic knowledge and understanding, but you need to be using your books and BBC Bite Size, any other resources you've got as well. So if you could just get these down, and then I'm going to start. So, religious fundamentalism and the Bible Belt. In the 1920s, most rural Americans are very, very religious people. The southeastern states is highlighted on the map by here, so we're looking at places like South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and part of Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee. Several of the states consider themselves to be righteous and God-fearing Christians. They're known as fundamentalists. They're WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and they believe in everything the Bible tells them. They think that everything in the Bible should be taken literally and not questioned. This is very different to some of the suburban American views who have started to believe in Darwinism, or started to open their minds up to other theories. For instance, in states such as New York, Washington, those kinds of areas, disagreed quite strongly with the fundamentalists in the Bible Belt. They believed in teaching the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, that we had evolved from apes, but the fundamentalists wouldn't even consider this. They wouldn't consider teaching this in their school. In fact, in Tennessee in 1924, the Butler Act was passed, and this is really important, and this made it illegal for any public school to teach any theory which denied the story of divine creation. So any theory that denied the idea the world was created in 6 days was not allowed to be taught in these schools. 5 other states then passed similar laws in the year after as well. Now this led to what is known quite famously as the monkey trial. So as we've discussed, the ideas of the fundamentalists got a lot of publicity in 1925 in America, and when the Butler Act was passed, there was quite a lot of outrage from some people within the Bible Belt who weren't fundamentalists, and a lot of people outside of the Bible Belt as well who not just believed in Darwinism, but believed in the right to learn different things. As a result, a man called John Scopes, backed by the American Civil Liberties Union in Tennessee, taught his biology class about Darwin and evolution. And he did this to make a political point. He was then arrested for breaking the law. His court case received a lot of publicity in the media. Clarence Darrow was a very famous criminal defense lawyer, and he defended John Scopes. And the fundamentalists were defended then by William Jennings Bryan, who again was a famous fundamentalist prosecution lawyer. Now, the results are the most important thing here, because when looking at events such as the monkey trial in our exam, we're going to be thinking about what was the impact of this event, why was it important, and there's many reasons that this event was important. So, to many people living outside the Bible Belt, this really highlighted how irrational the fundamentalists were, and how unwilling to look at anything other than their own opinions they seemed to be. Scopes was found guilty because technically he had broken the law. Excuse me. So he was found guilty of teaching the theory of evolution, which he had done, and there was a law in place that stopped him being able to do this, and he was fined $100, which is probably about today $1,400. By 1929, 6 states in the Bible Belt had banned teaching the theory of evolution, passed laws against it. And this is really important because it was now possible that some children in America would grow up having no idea that Darwinism or the theory of evolution existed. And they would only have the one viewpoint. They would only have the viewpoint of the fundamentalists, the word of the Bible, and nothing else. And most importantly, it showed a really different side to America from the Jazz Age that was being portrayed at the moment. So, for instance, there was a lot of jazz clubs, there was a lot of the jazz singers, women, and the age of the flapper. Black people, despite still being racially abused and treated awfully, were actually allowed to go into some of the speakeasies, and musical careers were sort of taking off, and this was highlighted in America as being quite glamorous. Well, this trial showed the other side of America, the more conservative, traditional, intolerant side of America. So the treatment of Native Americans. At the beginning of the 20th century, Native Americans had actually been placed on reservations, which were poor quality land, where they were encouraged to reject their own culture and basically forced into white Christian culture. There was an act passed in 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act, which recognised Americans as citizens of the United States and enabled them to actually have a say in elections and vote, which is ridiculous when you think about it, because obviously the Native Americans are just that. They are native to America. They were there first, and they're actually being treated as second-class citizens in their own country. Their children were sent away to boarding schools to be forced into sort of Christian culture. And they quite often would be seen demonstrating crafts or languages or Native American, performing in Native American costume. There'd been a eugenics program which had managed them and stopped them reproducing, treated horrendously really in the early 1920s and after actually. Because even after the Citizenship Act had passed, it was still difficult for them to live in the country because they were often one of the poorest groups in the country. They were treated like second-class citizens. They were quite often victims of racial intolerance, and they were often barred from voting anyway due to issues such as literacy tests, due to the fact that education in their schools was really poor. In 1928, the Merriam Report was prepared, and it stated that the boarding schools were really underfunded, they were really understaffed, run very harshly, and it recommended a change of the curriculum because education had been focused on trying to force the Native Americans to Westernize, essentially, to become what the rest of America, or the so-called WASPs, wanted. So they were treated really, really badly. Now, segregation and the Jim Crow laws. Probably one of the, well, definitely is the worst example of intolerance in America during this time, the segregation and the Jim Crow laws and the KKK, which we'll look at in a sec. So black people have been brought to America as slaves in the 17th and 18th centuries. Previous to slavery being abolished in the 1860s. Now, because of this, there was actually more black people than white people living in the southern states, because in the southern states is where all the plantations were, where the slaves were kept. Fearing the power of black Americans, the state governments then introduced the Jim Crow laws to control them. This was named after a 19th comedian act, so-called comedian, who ridiculed black people. So there was segregation in schools, parks, libraries, and lots of other public places, drinking fountains. They weren't allowed to be in the same taxis. They weren't allowed to be on the same bus. Or if they were allowed to be on the same buses, but they had to sit at the back or stand if there wasn't enough space for the white people that wanted to get on the bus. Boxing matches, racetracks, also segregated. They weren't allowed to vote, and they denied access to jobs and a reasonable education. And between 1915 and 1920, more than 460 black Americans were actually lynched. So the Jim Crow laws are a set of laws in the South that segregated Americans and actually made it okay for them to be lynched. Made it okay for them to be treated horrifically. And obviously then this led to the Ku Klux Klan. So this diagram quite nicely shows the impact of the Ku Klux Klan and sort of the extent of their influence. So the police ignored serious crimes, were unable then to protect victims, and a lot of them were members of the Ku Klux Klan. They took part in the killings anyway. The courts were friends of the Klan. Quite often they'd let them off and pardon them. And the politicians were inherently racist, a lot of them anyway, and then were actually scared of losing votes and fearful of the Ku Klux Klan as well, because quite often they would be threatened unless they did what the Ku Klux Klan wanted. So, what is the Ku Klux Klan? Well, it's a racist group that was established by people who believed that white people were better and wanted to see black people remain as slaves. And it starts in the southern states at the end of the Civil War. And it dies down a bit, but it's revived in 1915 following the release of a film called Birth of a Nation. Now, Birth of a Nation is a film about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. It very much shows the Ku Klux Klan as heroes of America, wanting to save the American way, wanting to save the traditional values of America. The black people that are in the film are actually played by white people who are blacked up, and they're portrayed as violent, rapists, thieves, that kind of thing as well. And within this film, the Ku Klux Klan are seen saving various characters, mostly women, from the black people in the film. After A Birth of a Nation, which was very popular, unfortunately, it grew really quickly. In 1921, it had over 100,000 members. By the mid-1920s, the movement was at its strongest and it had 5 million members. Only WASPs could join the Klan. The KKK discriminated against not just black people, but Roman Catholics, Jews, Mexicans, anyone that was different to what they perceived as the American ideal. They often killed black people by lynching them. And sometimes the local police could not really protect the victims and they even took part in the killings. Those responsible, because they were protected by the courts, were not brought to justice. Very, very difficult of people to change the attitude of white people in the South, and politicians were very scared of losing votes. However, they did start to decline in 1925 after David Stevenson, the Klan Indiana Grand Dragon, is found guilty of causing serious injuries to a woman on a train. He assaulted his secretary, and the courts at this point didn't pardon him. And after that, the membership of the Klan started to fall. So what activities did the Klan engage in? Well, in 1921, a man called Chris Larkin, a restaurant owner, was run out of town because he was accused of being a foreigner. His parents were Greek. George Armwood was a mentally disabled man who, in October 1933, was accused of assaulting an 82-year-old white woman. Members of the Klan dragged him from jail and beat him to death. His body was strung up on a tree and dragged through town before being set on fire. The police just watched and did nothing. Now, quite often at these meetings as well, their outfits were white robes and white hoods designed to conceal the identity of Klan members who often attacked at night. They burned crosses, they carried American flags, and called themselves things like Imperial Wizards. So the Imperial Wizard was the head of the Ku Klux Klan. So, what were the black people's in the South reaction to this? How did they deal with being treated so horrendously by people like the Ku Klux Klan? In short, they migrated, they left, they moved up north. Now, industrial development had created a demand for manufactured goods, and there was a lot of jobs created in the industrial cities of the north. Between 1916 and 1920, almost 1 million black people went north in the Great Migration to places like Chicago, New York, and Detroit. There were no Jim Crow laws in the north, but they were still treated as second-class citizens in the northern cities. They had poor wages, they lived in poor neighborhoods, and they lived in ghettos like Harlem in New York. There were some improvements in the sense that the Ford Motor Company, which was based in northern industrial cities of Pittsburgh and Detroit, actually only employed 50 black Americans in 1916, but by 1926 it had 10,000. Having said that, the majority of Americans didn't benefit from the boom in the 20s. In 1919, there was also riots in 20 cities as racial tension between black and white people increased. And this actually sparked an increase in membership of the Ku Klux Klan in the north as well. There were some improvements in Chicago and New York. There's a growing black middle class. Department stores were boycotted until they agreed to employ black assistants. Jazz brought fame to several black singers and musicians such as Louis Armstrong. The black neighborhood of Harlem in New York became the center of Harlem Renaissance for black singers, musicians, artists, writers, and poets. Black theatre attracted big audiences as well, and the life expectancy for black people did increase from 45 in 1900 to 48 in 1930, so not by much really. So there were some improvements, but they were still being treated really, really badly, even in the north. Okay, they still didn't have the best jobs. However, in the south, quite often they would live in poverty, in hovels. They'd have no running water, they'd have no electricity, and even then their houses would be burned or attacked by the white people in the community. So it was marginally better as well, in that they could live in flats and they could have electricity and running water, but still, again, not treated as they should be at all. So again, We then get the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, the NAACP, which is established in 1909 by William Du Bois. The NAACP focused on opposing racism through legal methods, and they were non-violent. They held marches and protests. The NAACP had several successes. One of them, Linda Brown, is one example, whereby a little girl called Linda Brown wasn't allowed to go to the primary school that was closest to her house. Instead, she had to go to the black primary school, which was very far away and across a really busy freeway. Her father went to the NAACP for help. They took it to the Supreme Court and she actually won. And there's several cases like that with the NAACP as well. You've then got the UNIA, which was established in 1914 by Marcus Garvey. This was much more militant than the NAACP, and Garvey encouraged black people to establish their own businesses, to employ black people only, and encouraged them to return to what he felt was their homeland, Africa. And Black is Beautiful was his most famous slogan. Now, he started, and this started the foundation for the Black Power movement and the inspiration for Malcolm X. Du Bois and Garvey both tried to improve conditions for black people, but their methods were actually so different that they became sworn enemies. And that is it for key question 2. Thank you very much for listening. I'll be back soon with key question 3. Thank you very much.